Lieutenant Amina Johnson grew up in a busy neighborhood in Marseille, where the streets were always alive with music, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread. Even as a little girl, she felt a special pull toward the sky. Whenever she heard the distant rumble of an airplane, she would stop whatever she was doing and look up, imagining herself soaring among the clouds. Her parents noticed how her eyes would light up, and they encouraged her love of flying by taking her to the local airfield on weekends. Amina would press her face against the fence, watching pilots climb into their cockpits and fire up the engines. She dreamed of the day when it would be her turn. Amina's family had come to France from West Africa before she was born. Her mother worked long hours as a nurse, and her father fixed cars in his small garage. They taught her that hard work and respect could open any door, even if some doors felt heavy to push. At school, Amina was quiet but determined. She studied hard in every subject, though math and physics became her favorites because they helped her understand how things moved and why machines worked. At home, she built model planes from kits, carefully painting them blue or gray to match the jets she saw on her trips to the airfield. Even with her strong mind and kind heart, Amina faced moments when others doubted her. Some classmates teased her for her dark skin or for daring to say she wanted to be a pilot. Older boys would snicker when she answered physics questions, certain she was wrong before she spoke. But Amina did not let those voices hold her back. She practiced answering questions confidently, turned insults into fuel for her fire, and leaned on her parents' words of encouragement. Her teachers began to notice that she had a calm confidence and a rare focus. When she explained a complex idea, she used simple language and clear examples, helping everyone in the class understand. By the time she finished high school, Amina had earned top marks and a recommendation to apply to the French Air and Space Force Academy. Her application essay spoke of freedom, discipline, and the pride she felt whenever an airplane flew overhead. She wrote about her family's journey to France and how she wanted to honor their hard work by protecting the skies. When she received the acceptance letter, her joy was matched only by her mother's tears and her father's proud smile. At the academy, she met cadets from all over the country. Some of them came from military families, while others had never left home before. Amina felt both excitement and nerves, but she found strength in the uniform she wore for the first time. On graduation day, training at the academy was tough. Mornings began before sunrise, with drills, push-ups, and long runs. Then came classes in aerodynamics, navigation, and leadership. Afternoons were for flight simulators, where cadets learned to respond without thinking, trusting their instincts and their instruments. Amina sometimes fell behind on the physical tests, but she never gave up. She arrived early to practice and stayed late to study manuals. When a drill sergeant shouted, she met his eyes calmly and followed every order with precision. Gradually, instructors began to praise her quick learning and careful planning. In simulations, she landed with smooth precision and made split-second decisions that kept virtual aircraft safe. After graduation, Amina moved on to advanced training with real jets. She learned to fly various aircraft before the Rafale program chose candidates to train on France's top fighter jet. The Rafale was fast, agile, and packed with advanced electronics. At first, the cockpit felt cramped and the controls heavy. Amina felt the roar of the engine press her back into the seat, and at high speed, the world blurred outside her canopy. She reminded herself of her childhood dreams and the challenge of every obstacle she had faced. She spent hours studying the jet's systems, and during practice flights, she repeated every maneuver until it felt natural. Instructors watched her land perfectly on narrow runways and execute complex turns with calm focus. Soon, Amina was part of a squadron of Rafale pilots. They trained together in harsh weather over both sea and land. She proved her skill in mock combat exercises, guiding her jet to win simulated dogfights and support ground operations. Fellow pilots began to respect her not just for her heritage or her quiet manner, but for her skill and discipline. When she briefed the team before a mission, she spoke clearly, explaining each step and listening to input. Her calm voice carried authority. Sometimes, after a long training day, they would joke and laugh in the hangar, and Amina joined in easily. reminding everyone that behind the uniform was a person who loved good food, music, and family. News of her successes reached beyond her squadron. Local newspapers ran stories about the talented pilot from Marseille, and young girls in her old neighborhood began calling her the Sky Lady. Amina took the attention in stride, knowing that every success came from hard work and respect for others. She began visiting schools, telling children that no dream was too big. She showed them her flight gear, let them touch her helmet, and encouraged them to learn, to ask questions, and to reach higher. She spoke simply, saying, "We all have our paths. Mine led me to the skies. May lead you to a lab, a stage, or anywhere you choose." Back at the base, Amina's leadership skills grew. When a new pilot joined the squadron, her squadron leader would often ask Amina to mentor him or her. She guided them patiently, sharing tips on landing in strong winds and managing the stress of flying at high speed. She reminded them to rest, to trust their training, and to ask for help when they needed it. In every mission and every training exercise, Amina showed that strength came not only from muscles or machines, but from respect, knowledge, and kindness. By the time the joint NATO exercise was announced, Amina was known as a top pilot and a trusted leader. She packed her bags, loaded her flight gear, and prepared to travel to the remote camp in Eastern Europe. She felt pride in wearing her uniform, a symbol of her hard journey from a curious child in Marseille to a decorated lieutenant in the skies. She remembered her mother's words, "Wear it with honor, because you earned it." She was ready for whatever came next. Lieutenant Amina Johnson stepped from the transport vehicle into the dusty compound, the wind stirring small clouds of sand around her boots. She felt the warmth of the late afternoon sun and heard distant engines humming as other jets circled. Overhead, the camp lay at the edge of a broad plain, surrounded by low hills where soldiers watched for any sign of movement. Tents, cargo containers, and temporary shelters formed neat rows, and camouflage netting shaded small clusters of vehicles and equipment. Amina took a deep breath, savoring the scent of dry earth mixed with engine oil and the soft tang of pine. From nearby brush, she wore her uniform with pride, crisp, clean, and perfectly pressed. The silver bars on her shoulders marked her as a lieutenant, and the small French flag patch reminded everyone of her country and her service. Amina carried her briefcase in one hand and her helmet bag in the other, moving with calm confidence. As she approached the nearest group of Allied officers, they stood talking in small clusters, some smoking cigarettes, others checking maps spread across folding tables. When she reached them, she offered a polite salute. "Lieutenant Johnson," said Major Eric Larson from Denmark, looking up from a map of flight patterns. He shook her hand warmly. "Thank you for coming. We've heard such good things about your work with the Rafale. We need your help to plan the air support protocols for tomorrow's exercise." Amina smiled and nodded. "Of course, Major. I'm ready to brief the ground teams and ensure we have clear communication. Let me set up my presentation." She placed her briefcase on the table and unlatched it, pulling out printed diagrams, a small projector, and a binder filled with radio call signs and contingency plans. Lieutenant Marcus Byers from Canada stepped forward. "We appreciate your thoroughness. We want to avoid any confusion during the exercise." "Tell us your key points," Amina began. She placed a diagram of the Rafale's flight envelope on the table and pointed to the maximum safe altitude. She explained each phase of an air support mission in simple, clear terms: how to call for assistance, the proper radio frequencies, the timing for engagement, and the signals for aborting a mission. She spoke slowly enough for non-native English speakers to follow, but with enough technical detail that experienced commanders nodded in approval as she moved through the slides. She sensed growing respect in the room. Officers scribbled notes, asked pointed questions, and thanked her for clarifying difficult points. The work felt familiar, like her training sessions at home base. Only now the stakes were higher because real soldiers would depend on her guidance. Amina felt the weight of that responsibility, but welcomed it. She had prepared for every possible scenario. Just as she was wrapping up the final slide, a tall man in a different uniform strode toward the table. He wore a patch indicating he commanded. the camp's defense force. His uniform was neat, but his expression was stern. He looked at the papers spread before him, and then up at Amina, with a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Lieutenant," he said, his tone curt, "I'm Colonel Ivan Petrov. I wasn't told we'd have an officer in full uniform briefing our troops. For security reasons, you need to remove your name tag and rank insignia before you speak to the men." Amina paused, surprised. She studied his face, then glanced at the group behind her. They looked confused. Major Larson frowned. Lieutenant Byers opened his mouth, then closed it. Amina's mind raced. She knew no regulation required her to strip insignia for security, especially since the exercise emphasized cooperation and respect among NATO members. Still, the colonel stood firm, his jaw set. "I'm sorry, Colonel," Amina replied, keeping her voice steady. "I can brief without insignia, but I believe it's important for these men to know who I am and what I represent. The Rafale program depends on clear lines of authority. Removing my insignia could confuse the soldiers." Colonel Petrov's eyes narrowed. He leaned in, lowering his voice so only Amina could hear. "This is my camp. I set the rules here. You will remove them now, or I will ask you to leave the briefing area." A tense silence fell. Amina felt a prick of anger but refused to show it. She took a slow breath and reminded herself of the training that had prepared her for high-pressure situations. She also knew that arguing would only escalate the conflict. Still, she could not accept disrespect toward her uniform or her rank. "I appreciate your concern for security, Colonel," she said evenly. "I will remove the insignia. If you explain how this improves security, if it is a matter of protocol, please show me the appropriate regulation." Colonel Petrov's face reddened, straightened, taking a small step back. He glanced at his fellow officers. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed to side with him. He must have felt their silent support. He cleared his throat. "There is no written regulation," he admitted in a low voice. "But we have had incidents in the past where visiting officers distracted troops." He paused, glancing at Amina's name tag. "It is tradition here to defer to camp security." Amina realized the problem was not security. It was an attitude toward her as a black woman in authority. She felt a familiar Ica mixture of frustration and clarity. This was not the first time someone doubted her competence because of her appearance, and she knew it would not be the last. Yet she did not want confrontation. She wanted action that would make the colonel and everyone present understand that respect was not optional. "Colonel," she said softly, "I value tradition and security. But the men I work with rely on knowing who gives them orders and why. If they see me without insignia, they may hesitate in the field. Hesitation could cost lives." Petrov's face hardened. He glanced at the other officers, and murmurs passed among them. Amina felt her heart beat faster, but she maintained. "Contact." She silently called back to Major Larson and Lieutenant Byers, who both gave her slight nods of support. She realized she had allies in the room, even if they were reluctant to speak. Finally, Colonel Petrov sighed. He straightened his shoulders and gave a curt nod. "Keep your uniform," he said. "But I expect strict discipline from all personnel. Any misstep, and you will answer to me." Amina nodded, carefully controlling her expression. "Understood, Colonel. I will begin the mission briefing." She turned back to the table, picked up her diagrams, and resumed her presentation as though nothing had happened. She spoke with renewed focus, giving extra attention to radio check procedures and emergency rally points. Her voice carried authority, and the officers listened without interruption. When she finished, Major Larson stood and applauded. Others joined in. Some offered thanks, some gave respectful salutes, and one young soldier even asked for her business card, saying he wanted to learn more about the Rafale program. Amina answered each question kindly, explaining how to request further information and offering to stay for one-on-one consultations. After the crowd dispersed, she gathered her materials and prepared to leave. She felt a mix of relief and resolve. The insult was still fresh in her mind, but she refused to let it shadow the mission. Her uniform had remained intact, and her message had been clear. Her rank and skill could not be ignored. As she walked toward her quarters, she reflected on the camp commander's words and his hidden prejudice. The silent challenge burned like a small flame in her chest. She thought of her parents, who had taught her to face obstacles with dignity and to let actions speak louder than words. Today, her actions had shown respect for the mission and undeniable proof of her authority. That night, seated at a small wooden table, under a single lamp, Amina wrote an email to her squadron leader. She described the incident in factual terms, noting the colonel's demand, her response, and the support she had from allied officers. She asked for advice on whether formal action was needed. Then she closed her laptop and stared out at the dark hills, imagining the Rafale of tomorrow's sortie, knowing that when she climbed into its cockpit, she would carry not only her rank, but also her pride and determination. In her quiet room, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She thought of her childhood dreams, of the models she built and the fence she pressed against. She remembered the day her father told her, "You have the right to wear that uniform, Amina. You earned every thread." She felt the weight of that promise now, and it strengthened her. She would not let one person's bias define her. Tomorrow she would fly, and she would show everyone exactly what that uniform meant. She woke before dawn, the thin light slipping through the small window of her quarters. Outside, the camp was quiet, but Amina's mind raced. She dressed slowly, folding her uniform with care and pinning her insignia in place. Every button, every crease mattered to her. Today's mission was more than another training exercise. It was her way to stand up for herself and for every soldier who deserved respect. She wanted to make sure that when she climbed into the cockpit, she carried with her not only fuel and ordnance, but also the weight of her pride. Down the hallway, she found Sergeant Miguel Hernandez, the squadron safety officer, waiting by the briefing room door. His face was lined from long hours, but his eyes showed understanding. "Morning, Lieutenant," he said softly. "Your squadron leader will see you now." He stepped aside, and Amina entered the small office where Captain Laurent Duval sat. Behind a wooden desk, maps and schematics of the Rafale hung on the walls. Captain Duval looked up from his notes. "Lieutenant Johnson," he said with a respectful nod, "I've read your report on yesterday's incident. How can I help?" His voice was calm without judgment. Amina felt relief that she had an ally here. "I want to fly the Rafale sortie scheduled for this afternoon," she said, her voice steady. "I believe that showing my authority in the air will make a clear statement. It's not about proving I'm right. It's about showing that respect for rank and skill is not optional." She passed him the dossier she had prepared, flight plan, communications protocol, and details of the joint exercise. Duval studied the pages. "I agree," he said finally. "This will go in the mission log as a standard patrol, but you'll be in command. I'll arrange for ground control to include your call sign on all broadcasts. You'll have the full support of our team." He tapped the papers. "You're cleared. Your flight plan departs at 1400 hours. Make sure you're in the tower by 1300 for final checks." Amina thanked him and left, her heart pounding with purpose. Back in her quarters, she reviewed the flight plan again. She checked fuel levels, weight distribution, radio frequencies, and emergency procedures. Every detail mattered. She filled her helmet bag with gloves, maps, and a spare set of earplugs. She double-checked her flight suit pockets for signal mirror and emergency radio. Each layer of preparation made her feel more in control. At midday, the sun was high and hot. Mina arrived at the airfield and walked across the tarmac toward the sleek Rafale parked on the maintenance ramp. Two technicians were making final adjustments, tightening fasteners and running diagnostics. She greeted them with a nod, and they stepped aside respectfully. Her jet was ready. It gleamed under the sun, its gray body reflecting the blue sky, and the French roundel looked sharp on the fuselage. As she climbed the ladder to the cockpit, memories flashed through her mind. The first time she sat in a simulator and felt the controls respond. The first time she felt G-forces press her back in a training flight. The first time someone doubted her because of her skin. She pushed those memories together and turned them into determination. She settled into the seat, fastened her harness, and slipped on her helmet. The seal of the visor felt cool against her face. "Tower, this is Ice Falcon 17. requesting start clearance. Her voice came calm through the speaker. The tower controller replied, Ice Falcon 17, cleared to start engines. Departure runway 06. She felt the engines ignite, the rumble growing from a low hum to a powerful roar. She ran through the start checklist, each step precise, and practiced. When the final green light blinked, she released the brakes and taxied toward the runway. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at the base. The camp commander's tent was just visible beyond the trees. She thought of Colonel Petrov's curt demand and the doubt in his eyes. Then she focused ahead. The runway stretched in front of her like a promise. She pushed the stick forward and felt the acceleration press her deeper into the seat. In a few seconds, she was airborne, climbing steeply toward the clear sky. She leveled off at 2,000 feet, scanning her instruments. Ground control came on the radio. Ice Falcon 17, you're clear to proceed to waypoint Alpha. She repeated the call, then banked to the east, heading back toward the camp. Below, she could see tiny vehicles, tents, and the network of roads. As she approached, she dialed the volume up on her radio. Ground control, this is Ice Falcon 17, preparing for low pass. Confirm frequency 320.5. Calm voice answered. Confirmed Ice Falcon 17. She took a deep breath and lined up over the camp perimeter. Her hands were steady on the controls as she descended to a low altitude just a few hundred feet above the ground. The roar of the engine echoed across the plain. Soldiers looked up, shielding their eyes against the sun. Amina saw them point and scrambled to clear the runway and equipment areas. The camp commander rushed out of his tent, suit jacket flapping, staring up at the jet. She flew the pass smoothly, leaving a trail of displaced air. At the far end, she pulled up in a graceful climb, then turned the Rafale around for a second. Pass. This time she keyed her mic. Colonel Petrov, she said evenly. This is Lieutenant Amina Johnson of the French Air and Space Force. I remain in full uniform in command of this sortie. Respect for all officers is essential to mission. Success. The words crackled over the radio, clear and without a hint of anger. Beneath her, she saw soldiers stand at attention. She felt the power of that moment. The sky was hers, and she owned it. She completed the second pass and climbed back to cruising altitude. Ground control acknowledged her message. Ice Falcon 17. Message received loud and clear. In the cockpit, her chest felt full. The sweat on her palms and the adrenaline in her veins confirmed that this was more than a flight. It was a declaration. After completing the assigned patrol route, she returned to base. As she taxied in, mechanics watched with nods of respect. She shut down the engines and climbed out, removing her helmet. Captain Duval was waiting, arms crossed, a small smile on his face. Well done, he said quietly. You made your point. Mina nodded, feeling a mix of relief and triumph. She collected her helmet bag and flight suit and walked back toward the squadron building. Soldiers she passed saluted or offered thumbs-up gestures. In the mess hall, others tapped their chests in a salute of respect. Camp commander remained silent, but Amina could feel the shift in the air. Yesterday's rude demand would not be repeated. Later that evening, she emailed her report. She described every detail, the takeoff, the low passes, the radio message. She attached flight data and asked that the report be entered into the official record. She wanted NATO leadership to see that unity and respect were vital. Then she sat quietly, thinking of how the sky had carried her message across the camp. In her room, she reflected on the day's events. The thrill of flying the Rafale, the power of clear radio communication, and the sight of soldiers standing at attention, all of it reminded her why she loved this profession. She also felt the weight of responsibility. She had used her position to challenge a wrong, but she knew many battles remained. Prejudice was not erased by a single flight. Still, she had shown that action could change minds faster than words. Before sleep took her, she wrote in her journal, "Today, I flew not just for training, but for respect. The jet carried my message louder than any speech. I will continue to earn my wings and the respect that comes with them." She closed the journal and rested her pen beside it. As she drifted off, The last thought in her mind was the hum of the Rafale's engines and the endless sky beyond her window, a sky where she belonged. She climbed into the cockpit before dawn, the air on the tarmac cool and still. The Rafale sat ready on the runway, its sleek form resting on sturdy landing gear. Amina ran her fingers over the canopy frame, feeling the smooth metal beneath her gloves. In that moment, she felt both excitement and calm. Today's flight was more than a mission, it was her answer to the silent challenge she faced yesterday. She settled into the pilot's seat, adjusted her harness, and slid on her helmet. The seal of the visor felt snug, shutting out the world. And focusing her mind on the instruments before her, she ran through her pre-flight checks. Fuel gauges steady, engine oil at optimal levels, control surfaces clear and free. Each green light on the panel brought a quiet reassurance. In the briefing room, she had given every detail. I'm in the cockpit. She turned planning into action. Tower. Ice Falcon 17 requesting engine start, she said, her voice calm. A moment later, the tower responded, clearing her to proceed. She felt the engines ignite, the roar building into a powerful growl beneath her. The force pressed her back, and she smiled. This was home. She taxied to the runway, her tires rolling. Over the grooved surface, the first light of dawn painted soft pink on the horizon, and she could see the camp where yesterday's insult had occurred. She remembered Colonel Petrov's curt command, "Remove your uniform." The memory still stung. But right now, she wore her uniform in full, her rank shining on her shoulders, and her heart brimmed with determination. At the runway threshold, she paused and looked up. A cool breeze tickled the tail of her flight suit, carrying the scent of morning dew and jet fuel. Then she eased the stick forward. The Rafale surged ahead, accelerating with fierce power. Within seconds, she was airborne, climbing steeply and leaving the runway far below. She retracted the landing gear with a smooth motion and straightened the jet. Leveling off at 1,000 feet, she tested her radio. Ice Falcon 17 to ground control. Systems check complete. A clear voice answered, Ice Falcon 17. All systems green. Proceed with mission. She nodded, even though no one could see her, and set her navigation to the camp perimeter as she flew across the plain. The low hills of the exercise area passed beneath her wings. The sun now glowed bright, illuminating the landscape in warm gold. She thought of the soldiers in the camp below their tents, their vehicles, their faces turned skyward. She wanted every one of them to see her, to know she was not invisible, to understand that her authority was as real as the jet beneath her. She descended gradually, using the autopilot to manage airspeed and altitude. At 300 feet, she switched off the autopilot and took the controls. The wind buffeted the jet, but she guided it smoothly. Her heart rate quickened with the thrill of altitude flight. She wove through the sky like a hawk, eyes sharp, hands steady. Below, the camp commander's tent nestled among trees. Mina tightened her grip on the stick and lined up for her first pass. She aimed to fly directly over the commander's tent, just a few dozen feet above the ground. The roar of the engines would shake the earth, and the sight of her Rafale would leave no doubt of her presence. She cut the throttle slightly and dropped into a gentle dive. Her jet responded instantly, and the ground rushed up to meet her. At 60 meters, she leveled off. The engines thundered so loudly that she could feel the vibration through her seat. Soldiers scrambled, running to clear the area. Their uniforms billowed in some raised rifles in salute, while others shielded their eyes against the sun. As she passed over, she keyed her microphone. "Colonel Petrov," she said clearly. "This is Lieutenant Amina Johnson of the French Air and Space Force. I remain fully in uniform and in command of this sortie. My rank and authority come from my training and performance, not from the color of my skin." Her words crackled over the radio, cutting through the engine noise. She held the low pass for only a few seconds, but time seemed to slow as she saw the commander's head snap upward. He stood rigid, arms hanging at his sides, staring at her. Dare. His jaw dropped, and for a moment she swore she saw surprise and respect mix in his eyes. Then she added, "Respect for all officers is essential to mission success," and gently eased the stick forward, climbing away. She banked to the left, climbing to 500 feet, then turned back toward the camp for a second pass. This time, she came in at a slight angle, giving every soldier a better view of her jet's insignia and her name printed on the side. The sun glinted off the metal and the tricolor roundel shone bright. It was a moving statement, stronger than any words she could speak on the ground again. She activated her mic. "Ice Falcon, 1-7. To all personnel in Camp Echo. A clear chain of command is vital. Okay, lead this mission, and I deserve your respect." She felt the power of the moment, the unity of voice and machine. The soldiers looked up in unison, and she imagined the ripple of understanding spreading through them. She climbed back to 2,000 feet, heart still pounding, and turned toward the field training area. Her mission required her to fly the standard patrol route, checking waypoints and simulating support. But she kept the message fresh in every radio check. At each waypoint, she called in with her identification and a reminder, "Ice Falcon 1-7 on station. Ready to support. Respect for rank ensures safety." Ground control acknowledged with brief, crisp replies. "Ice Falcon 1-7, acknowledged." With each acknowledgement, her confidence grew. She flew the route with precision, performing steep climbs, gentle dives, and tight turns. The Rafale responded to her commands as if it were an extension of her own body. She felt connected mind, body, and jet working in perfect harmony. During a straight segment over a dry riverbed, she tested one of the Rafale's advanced systems. The heads-up display lit up with telemetry data. She toggled through a weapon, simulations, and targeting exercises, ensuring she knew every switch and dial. Even though no live weapons were aboard, she treated the exercise as if it were real. This was part of the broader mission, to prepare for any situation as she approached the final waypoint. She considered ending the patrol, but she decided on one more message. She angled the jet to face the rising sun, then cut her throttle. The Rafale slowed, its engines humming at idle. She descended to a low pass above the same dry riverbed where a small group of technicians stood observing. She aimed her jet directly at them, the morning light streaming behind her. "Personnel of Camp Echo," she said over the radio, "leadership and respect are not negotiable. We must value each other's skills and experience. That is how we succeed." Her voice was calm but firm. Then she opened the throttle and climbed steeply into the sky. Leaving the field behind, with the mission complete, she set course back to base. As the airfield came into view, she switched off the external cameras and prepared for landing. Sun now shone bright overhead, and the runway stretched ahead. She eased the jet into a smooth descent, lowering the landing gear and slowing her speed. The wheels touched down gently, and she rolled out. Following the guider's signals to her parking spot, she shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit. Her legs felt a pleasant stiffness from the flight. She removed her helmet and looked at her uniform, still crisp and undamaged. She gathered her gear, knowing that every moment of that sortie had spoken louder than any report or complaint she could have written. Mechanics and fellow pilots walked over, offering nods and smiles. Captain Duval gave her a thumbs up. "Major." Larson awaited her with a small group of officers, including Lieutenant Byers. They shook her hand and thanked her for the mission. "Well done," Larson said quietly. "Your message was heard loud and clear." Amina nodded, relief and pride mingling in her chest. She felt the shift in the camp's atmosphere. Yesterday's doubt was replaced by respect earned through skill and dignity. She knew this would not erase all prejudice, but it was a step forward. As she walked away toward the squadron building, she imagined the soldiers studying the flight logs and radio transcripts. She pictured them sharing stories of the low passes, of the pilot who refused to hide her rank. She thought of young cadets who would take her example to heart, learning that respect must be earned but should never be withheld. That evening, after debriefing, she sent her report. She wrote each detail plainly: times, altitudes, messages sent, reactions observed. She attached flight data and asked that it be circulated among Allied command. Then she sat back, breathing deeply. Mission had gone beyond training. She had flown a message of dignity across the sky, and it had landed in every mind below. In the quiet of her quarters, she reflected on the day. The roar of the Rafale's engines had become her voice, in the sky her stage. She felt gratitude for the chance to stand up, to show her worth not through words but through action. As she prepared for sleep, she wrote one final line in her journal. Today, I flew the message of respect. Above the noise, above the doubt, the sky listened. Then she closed the book, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and that she would face them with the same courage and grace. The next morning, the camp felt different. When Amina stepped onto the tarmac, she saw small groups of soldiers talking quietly, nodding as she passed. The harsh edge of yesterday's tension had softened. She wondered if the camp commander, Colonel Petrov, had spoken to his officers overnight. She could not know what he said, but she could feel the change in the air. During the morning briefing, Major Larson addressed the assembled officers and enlisted men. Amina stood at the side, listening. We all learned something valuable yesterday. He began, Lieutenant Johnson showed us how respect and clear authority keep us safe and united. From now on, every visiting officer will keep their rank insignia on, and we will treat every colleague with full respect. A murmur of agreement rose, and Amina saw Colonel Petrov nod from the back of the tent. After the briefing, several soldiers approached her. A young corporal from Lithuania shook her hand and said, Thank you for showing us how to fly with pride. I will remember this lesson. An older sergeant from Poland told her, In my long service, I have never seen such a clear message. You made us stop and think. Their words filled her with warmth. She realized that one flight could touch many hearts and open minds. That afternoon, she attended a meeting with NATO representatives. They wanted to update their joint exercise guidebook to include a clear statement about respecting all officers. As she sat around the table, Amina felt the weight of her uniform, not as a burden, but as a symbol of possibility. Her simple act of flying with pride had led to real policy change. She spoke about her experience, offering suggestions for language that would remind every soldier to honor each other's rank and role. The representatives listened attentively. When she finished, one senior officer said, Lieutenant Johnson, you have taught us more than any manual could. Your idea is in our next revision. She smiled and thanked them. She thought of the many people who would read that guidebook and learn her lesson, that respect is earned through skill. Yes, but it is given freely to those who serve. Back at her quarters that evening, she unpacked her kit and found a small thank you note from Major Larson. He had written, Your courage has changed this camp for the better. Thank you for leading by example. She placed the note on her desk next to her journal. She felt proud, but also humble. She knew that real change took time and that every day would bring new tests of character. A few days later, the exercise ended and the camps broke down. Amina prepared to return home. As she said farewell to her squadron, they gathered for one last photo. She stood in the center, her uniform crisp, her medals gleaming. Round her were officers from 5 nations, smiling and respectful. She thought of the little girl in Marseille who once pressed her face against the fence at the airfield. That child could not have imagined this. A black woman in full uniform, standing proud among so many allies. Before leaving the runway, Amina made one more low pass over the camp's departure area. She thought of Colonel Petrov and hoped he saw her message again. The jet climbed into the sky, and she waved from the cockpit as she passed. When she landed, she climbed out and looked up at the Rafale, its body touched by sunlight. She felt a sense of closure. This chapter of the story had a happy turn. Back in France, she resumed her routine. She visited local schools, sharing her story with children who smiled wide at the idea of a fighter pilot who stood up to prejudice. She took care to use simple words and clear examples. She told them that every uniform has meaning, that every person in uniform has worked hard to earn it. She showed them pictures of the Rafale and her flight logs, and she invited them to ask questions. Their eyes shone with wonder and hope. Her visits caught the attention of newspapers and social media, but she never sought fame. She wanted her story to inspire, not to glorify. When reporters asked about her flight, she said, "I flew because I believe that every soldier deserves respect. I hope my story helps others to stand tall, even when they face doubt." Her quiet courage spoke, louder than any headline. As months passed, Amina continued her duties in the squadron. She trained new pilots, mentored officers, and helped refine the tactics of air support. In every mission, she carried the lesson she had learned, that strength comes from skill. Yes, but true leadership shines when you treat others with dignity. She felt a steady pride every time she put on her uniform. One evening, she sat alone in the hangar, watching the sunset paint the jets in gold and orange. Ish! The rumble of engines echoed in the distance as pilots returned from training. A deep sense of belonging. The sky was her home. Her uniform was more than cloth, and badges it was proof of her journey from Marseille to the clouds. In her final journal entry for the year, she wrote, "Today I saw the long reach of respect. My one flight changed words in a book and smiles on many faces. My uniform remains a reminder. I belong here, and so does every person who works hard and dreams big. May we always lift each other as no one soars alone." She closed the book, her pen resting on the last page. Outside, the stars appeared in the darkening sky, and she felt ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Through the years, her story passed from pilot to pilot, from classroom to classroom, teaching that respect is not a gift to be given only sometimes. It is the foundation of every mission, every team, and every life. And somewhere above the clouds, Lieutenant Amina Johnson still flew her uniform as bright as her spirit, reminding the world that dignity and determination can change even the widest sky.